Hi, I'm David Taub, and welcome to the Parshah Rabbit Hole, where I find something weird in the weekly Torah portion and follow it all the way down until it gets even weirder. This week's rabbit hole eventually gets us to the common denominator between mental illness and faith, and the question of whether it's a good idea to be friends with gremlins. But, as always, we have to get there. This week's rabbit hole is dedicated to everyone who has sponsored an episode or made a donation to the rabbit hole so far. Thank you again so much, all of you. And for the rest of you, go to creativejudaism.com/donate to dedicate an upcoming episode or just to make a small donation to help me keep on digging. Alright, let's get started. This week's episode is going to be a little bit shorter than I originally wanted it to be. I actually had a lot more stuff that I wanted to share, but it was hard to get a rabbit hole done at all this week. With Pesach and everything, I was busy, so there's not as much as I wanted to share with you, but there's still a lot of really fun stuff. So let's get going. In this week's Torah portion, Parshah's Acharei, we learn all the details of all the sacrifices and stuff for Yom Kippur.
It sounds so made up, Yom Kippur.
And then after that, there are a bunch of other prohibitions, and it's one of those prohibitions that originally caught my attention when I was looking through the Parsha. And that's what I jumped into, and I followed all the sources, and I had a whole rabbit hole. But then I realized that one of the weirdest things in all of Judaism is actually in the Yom Kippur part at the beginning of the Parsha, and that's the scapegoat. And I felt like I couldn't ignore that.
They are trying to make me an scapegoat.
This is what it says in the Parsha. V'nasan Aaron al shnei haseirim gedolos gedol echad leHashem v'gedol echad la'Azazel. Aaron shall put lots on the two goats, one lot for Hashem and one lot for Azazel. So this is a famously confusing ritual. The Kohen Gadol is supposed to take two identical goats, and one of them is randomly selected to be brought as a sacrifice to Hashem, and the other is randomly selected to go to Azazel, which raises a lot of questions. Among those questions are, who or what is Azazel, and how could we offer a sacrifice to anything other than God? It's all very weird, and it gets even weirder because the goat that goes to Azazel is sent into the wilderness, into the desert, and by sent it means thrown off a cliff. So, yeah, even weirder. Which you'd think would make for a perfect topic for the rabbit hole. But, like I said, it's pretty famously weird, and I like to try to go for the more obscure weird. And as I said earlier, I already found that obscure weird thing that I was excited about, and it was something else entirely. But, when I was digging around for Azazel stuff just to cover all my bases, I found a very strange commentary from Ibn Ezra, which ends off with a cryptic clue.
But I found the clues that will safely take us through.
And when I followed that clue, it led me right back to the thing that I originally wanted to look into. So that's where this week's rabbit hole starts, with a clue about one of the most famously weird things in Judaism that takes us on a treasure hunt through Torah that leads us to another weird thing. So if you're ready to follow that clue, let's dive in. Okay, so first of all, what's Azazel? Rashi gives us an answer that's on the more grounded side of the spectrum of explanations given for this. He says, quoting from the Medrash, that Azazel is the name of a particularly jagged mountain. But Chizkuni gives us an answer from the other side of the spectrum, based on a different Medrash. He says, quoting from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, that the goat that's sent to Azazel is given to the Satan, the prosecuting angel whose job it is to prosecute against us on Yom Kippur and get us in trouble. And the goat is given to the Satan as a bribe so that he'll leave us alone. So yeah, that's weird. But those two sides of the spectrum also lead to two sides of a different problem. If Azazel is a place and not some other different thing other than Hashem, then both of the goats are sacrifices to Hashem, in which case the Azazel goat isn't following the laws of how we're supposed to offer a sacrifice, which is, there's specific laws of how to slaughter it, and it's clearly not anything to do with throwing live animals off cliffs, at least not normally. But if Azazel is some other entity, then it's obviously not a sacrifice. It can't be, because we wouldn't ever offer a sacrifice to anything except for Hashem. Either way, there are problems, and either way, it's weird. And that's where we'll jump into Ibn Ezra. He starts out by offering some possibilities for what the name Azazel means, which he seems to reject. Then he mentions an explanation from one of the Gaonim about how the Azazel goat is still a sacrifice to Hashem, even though it's not slaughtered properly. But then he rejects that and says, you don't need to jump through those hoops because it wasn't a sacrifice. In which case, we're back to Azazel being something other than God. So what is it? But instead of telling us what it is, he gives us a weird riddle. He says, I will reveal a little bit of its secret to you in a hint, which is, when you are 33 years old, you will understand it.
Today, he is 33 years old.
And that's it. That's all he gives us. When you're 33 years old, you'll understand. At first I thought it might be kind of like not learning Kabbalah until you're 40 years old, just with a different and much more specific number, but none of the commentaries I saw explained it that way. But when I started digging around, I found that there's actually a lot more interesting explanations of that riddle. One obscure commentary explained it by cheating a little bit. He says that he saw a version of the text where instead of the word shanim, which means years, it said shinayim, which means teeth. When you are a person who has 33 teeth, you'll understand. But human beings normally only have 32 teeth, and that's including the wisdom teeth, in which case, according to this, Ibn Ezra was saying, you'll never know what it means. Which is kind of a bummer of a riddle. You put in all this work to solve it, and then when you do, there's no payoff.
These questions that are bothering you, Larry, maybe they're like a toothache. Feel them for a while, then they go away.
But I like the teeth thing. I thought it was cool. But most commentaries agree on a different interpretation of Ibn Ezra's riddle. They say that it means that you should count 33 verses from the verse about Azazel, and then you'll get to the answer. So when I saw that, I loved it. I loved the idea of a commentary sending me on a treasure hunt through Torah. So where does it take us? Well, if you count 33 verses from Perek Tes Zayin Pasuk Ches, chapter 16, verse 8, you get to Perek Yud Zayin Pasuk Zayin, chapter 17, verse 7, which says, V'lo yizbechu oid azivchehem la'seirim asher heim zoinim achareihem. They shall no longer slaughter their sacrifices to the seirim after which they go astray. This verse comes after a prohibition of offering sacrifices outside of the temple, and then it gives us this prohibition to no longer offer sacrifices to the seirim. And this is a thing that I originally wanted to do the rabbit hole on to begin with, and Ibn Ezra led me right back to it. We'll get to what the seirim are in a moment, but just to recap the Ibn Ezra thing, based on this interpretation of the riddle, Ibn Ezra is saying that the goat that's given to Azazel is given to one of these seirim, which we're told explicitly not to offer sacrifices to. But that's okay, because he's also of the opinion that this cliff goat isn't a sacrifice. So that answers the riddle, but now we've got new questions. Who are these seirim that the Israelites apparently used to offer sacrifices to, which were explicitly prohibited from doing anymore, but that according to Ibn Ezra, we're still supposed to throw a goat off a cliff for? If you remember earlier when we were talking about the two goats, the word that we used there was the same one, seirim. Seirim means goats. But that's not what it means here. None of the commentaries say that this means goats here. According to Rashi, and it seems like everyone agrees with him on this, the seirim are shadim. Now here's where I had a little bit of a dilemma. If you've watched my videos before, you'll know that I usually translate shade as gremlin. Most people translate it as demon, but I feel like gremlin is a better translation. First of all, because I feel like demon has a lot of theological connotations that are associated with ideas from other religions, so I feel like using the word demon could get confusing and misleading. But also, even if we simplify the concept of demons and disregard the other theological stuff, I still feel like the word implies pure evil and some level of godlike power, which to me doesn't fit with the way shadim are described in the Talmud. Sure, the Talmud says very clearly in a lot of places that they're dangerous and offers a lot of different ways of avoiding being harmed by them, but they don't sound like pure evil and they don't sound all that powerful to me. One of the alternate names for these creatures in the Talmud is mazikim, which means destructive ones or troublemakers. Basically, to me, they sound like non-corporeal dudes or semi-corporeal dudes who cause problems but who can also be reasoned with and who can even be helpful sometimes. So I like using the word gremlins instead. But when I read this verse, it didn't sound like gremlins to me. It felt a lot more evil and powerful than gremlins. It felt like maybe it was scary goat demons. So I wasn't sure if I should translate it as goat gremlins or goat demons. Maybe the way the word is used in Tanakh, in the written Torah, is different than the way that it's used by Chazal in the Talmud and in Midrash. And to make matters even creepier, when Rashi tells us that seirim means shadim, he points us to a verse in Yeshayahu, or Isaiah, which details a prophecy about the downfall of Babylon. And when it's describing how desolate it'll be, it says, "And martens shall dwell there, and their houses shall be filled with ferrets, and ostriches shall dwell there, and scarier shall dance there." And in this verse too, pretty much all the commentaries agree that the scarier are shadim. So now the scary goat demons are dancing, which is super creepy to me. Okay, so another question. Why are they called goats? Ibn Ezra explains it in his commentary on this verse without any mention of the riddle in his commentary on the earlier verse. He says that they're shadim, which for now we'll translate as demons, but that they appear as goats to insane people.
Oh, great. I'm tuned into little kids, I'm tuned into dogs, and now I'm tuned into the mentally absent.
Which makes it even scarier. Also, I'm not sure what it means. There are two ways I could read this. One way is that they don't exist, and that they're a particular type of delusion where people see goat demons. The other way is that the goat demons do exist, but they can only be perceived by insane people. Radak gives a similar explanation, but a little bit different. He says that they're called goats because they appear as goats to those who believe in them, which is also creepy. And again, I have a couple of different ways I could read that. Either they don't exist, but the people who believe in them imagine them as goat-like, or they do exist, but you can only see them if you believe in them. So we've got Ibn Ezra saying that they look like goats to insane people, and Radak saying that they look like goats to the true goat demon believers. And I thought, maybe I could smush these together in one of two ways. One way is that they don't exist, and anybody who believes in them is insane. Or they do exist, but they can only be seen by people who are delusional enough to believe in them, which I think is a lovely idea. The Netziv offers a different approach to why these things are referred to as goats. He says it's because they're restless and they jump around like goats, which I think makes them even scarier, because now they're not just creepy dancing goat demons, now they're wild and unpredictable and jumping around. Okay, so now we have a few different explanations of the goat thing. But while I was digging around for stuff about these goat demons, one of the things that I saw in a few different commentaries was that they went into details about shadim in general, how they work, what they eat, all sorts of stuff. There was tons of it, and I can't share it all here. But one thing that I thought was particularly interesting was that Ramban gives us some specific details about the natural habitat of shadim. He says that the word shade comes from the word shodud, which means destroyed or desolate. So the reason why they're called shadim is because they live in desolate places like the desert. But their main habitat is the extreme outskirts of the earth. For example, the northernmost region of Earth, which is desolate because of how cold it is. So according to Ramban, gremlins or demons or whatever it is we're talking about live in the Arctic Circle. Just an aside, this fun fact about the natural habitat of gremlins made me think about making a nature documentary about gremlins. If that's something you think you'd watch, let me know in the comments. Okay, now it's time to resolve this gremlin demon dilemma. Sforno clarifies what these creatures are and what the Jewish people's relationship with them was. He says that they weren't worshipped as deities at all, so then why were we commanded not to give them offerings anymore? Sounds like we did worship them at one point. And the answer is because the ancient Israelites, before they were freed from Egypt, and before they were given the mitzvahs, used to give these goat guys stuff, but not as a sacrifice, but to earn their friendship so that they would help them and do stuff for them. And then as proof for this idea that these creatures can have that type of relationship, he gives examples from Gemara, and he specifically mentions Yosef Sheda, or Joseph the Gremlin, who we've talked about before, who was a gremlin who used to help the rabbis of the Talmud with gremlin-related stuff. So now this is starting to sound less like demons and more like the gremlins that I'm used to. And then he ends off by saying that it's worth considering the way the sages of the Talmud referred to these guys, as mazikim, destructive troublemakers, with potential to do serious damage, but also mortal beings that eat and drink and reproduce and die. But also, they're invisible. So there was kind of an information dump there at the end, a lot of different ideas just kind of piled on. But to me what I think it was saying is that, yeah, they're kind of contradictory beings, but they're not completely out of this world, godlike evil demons. They're supernatural, yeah, but they're mortal. They're guys, destructive invisible gremlin guys. So at least according to Sforno, they're just dangerous invisible gremlin guys who can be helpful if you get on their good side. The problem is if you start offering them gifts of blood. Alright, that's it. That's the rabbit hole. As I said, I had a lot more stuff that I wanted to get to, but it's late in the week and I had to get the video done. But if you want to find more stuff, please use the source sheet in the description as a springboard and share what you find in the comments. Thank you for following me down the rabbit hole. I'm not going to tell you how to get out, but I will give you a hint. You'll know in exactly 3, 2, 1.